Hello, it's Jim Brown back again with part 2 of our amateur video on the multi-hull pioneers. Now the next thing to happen in multi-hulls was this man, Richard C. Newick. Dick Newick began designing boats in the 1950s, but by the early 1970s he was showing the world how to go so very fast, even in very rough water. His racing trimarans were so quick that they would chop the tops off of the waves at speed, and he did it with a configuration like this. Here's one of his designs from the 1990s, the 38-foot Mockingbird. Just look at the shape of this thing. These craft streak through the water at speeds somewhat faster than the wind is blowing. Here's a view from down below looking through a porthole, but back in the cockpit, when the boat is thrown into attack and slows, you can see there's hardly any wind at all. Now Dick's influence is visible even in today's giant French ocean racers that can cross the Atlantic in 3 or 4 days. And that's to say nothing of the America's Cup vessels of 2010. Dick Newick's influence is evident everywhere in multi-hulls, and that's why I think he's had a more profound influence on multi-hull design than any other of the multi-hull pioneers. And incidentally, at age 81, he is still creating sterling multi-hulls. Then we have the commercial vessels, starting with the excursion catamarans that operate from all of the warm water resorts all around the world. Here in Hawaii, they commonly embark their passengers from the beach. And since Woody Brown started this business in the 1940s, these craft have exposed literally millions of people to the sensations of multi-hull sailing. And they can really spread out and enjoy themselves. And down below, they can congregate in private booths in their individual groups. Like many of these Coast Guard certified vessels, this one is built of laminated wood and epoxy by the constant camber method. You can step out onto the foredeck and see that she has an extremely stable ride. But now we mustn't forget the power multi-hulls, like this spiffy French number. And how about the catamaran equivalent of the so-called trawler yacht? This is the 50-foot Hippocampus designed by John Marples. And look at the interior on this thing. It's a duplex apartment on 2 hulls. And the thing is that it cruises at speeds in the mid-teens with transatlantic range. She goes roughly twice as fast on roughly half the fuel of her monohull equivalents, and that explains the modern fast ferries. These behemoth catamarans are operating worldwide on open ocean routes. But the latest ones are trimarans. This one is 410 feet long, carries 1,000 passengers, 260 cars at 40 knots. She achieves the highest speed for the smoothest ride and the lowest fuel consumption of any seafaring configuration known. And that explains, at least in part, why the Navy has chosen the same configuration for its latest strategic ship, the Independence, the Pirate Buster. And yes, these boats are trimarans. Remember what Arthur Piver said back in part 1 of this video?
We can look steadfastly in the face of centuries of sailing tradition, billions of sailors, and say, you guys were all wrong. This is the way you should have been doing it.
Well, now that's a great example of the boundless enthusiasm that drove the advent of these vessels in the 1960s. And despite the bombast of Arthur Piver, it begins to look now like he was right. Indeed, it's becoming quite clear that the way for humankind to go to sea is in the modern multi-hull. But let's get back to their beginnings now. During those 3 can-do decades following World War II, there was something that caused certain individuals to make that leap from nautical tradition into something as off the wall as multi-hulls. Well, those of us who made that leap are nowadays called the multi-hull pioneers. But back in the 1960s, I'll tell you, we were known by other names. We were called yachting's underdogs and the Hells Angels of the sea. Actually, I call us the Aquabats. In a way, I think we resembled the early aviators who went barnstorming around the country giving aerobatic exhibitions. You know, they were sometimes called the aerobats. I think we felt like the magnificent men in their sailing machines or something. But like the early aircraft, some of the early multi-hulls were thought of as, you know, backyard built contraptions. And I know that my first seagoing multi-hull was thought of that way. This was Wana, the 24-foot Piver-designed nugget trimaran and probably the first modern three-hull vessel to go to sea. Just an open-day sailor, but I put this little cuddy cabin on her because I wanted to return to the Caribbean where I had done some schooner bumming as a young man. But while I was building the boat, I bumped into Joanna, and we decided to take the whole trip together. After 50 years, we still sail in the same crew. But back then, I was diverted from my purpose, and by the time I got the boat built, Joanna was 5.5 months pregnant with our firstborn son, Stephen. We decided to go anyway. We sailed out the Golden Gate and turned left. And the next thing we knew, we were in the deep ocean rollers, surf riding in the open sea in an open boat. And believe me, it was the most terrifying thrill on this planet. Well, you can bet there's a lot more to that story, and I know that there are thousands of stories like that out there that are just pleading to be told. So we've made a place online for us all to do the telling. Now, don't forget the real multi-hull pioneers. There was Woody Brown, Rudy Choi, James Wareham, Arthur Piver, and Dick Newick. And I think if you ask any of them how the modern multi-hull happened, they would answer by telling how it happened for them. And that's what I'm going to do now, and you're invited to do the same at our website, outrig.org. Well, Abby has grown weary of me yakking at the camera. But we're going to shove off now, and we hope you'll join us. This is Jim Brown at Hick Neck, Virginia, in the southern Chesapeake. And Abby and I wish you and the Outrig Project fair winds. So come on now, rig out.